what is cancer?
I think the definition of cancer has moved a lot with time, and I think technology plays a very important role. The risk of cancer, 20 to 30% is sort of determined by genes. So that is how we are born with. There's very little we can do, but 70% could be lifestyle associated. With research, actually, many cancers are now very manageable, and that is why the death rate has not really been increasing. In fact, it has dropped for many cancer types. As a scientist, I can see that there are so many great innovations coming out, not just from the labs, but also from the startups.
Dr Andy Tay runs a lab in Singapore that turns our immune cells into warriors to treat cancer and infectious diseases. The presidential young professor explains what cancer is and how AI and new therapies are improving our chances of surviving cancer.
Unfortunately, I think it is still very expensive to have CAR T. A single treatment will cost in a range of about $500,000 US. So there are not many people who can afford it.
From our studio in Jones Bay Wharf, Sydney, here's Pod O'Sullivan with Don't Let the Old Man In, a podcast from the Wisdom Vault.
If you could reduce your chance of dying from cancer by 28%, would you? Studies from all over the world suggest a better educated person can add years to their life if they ever get cancer. And if you're a guy in midlife, understanding why could literally save you. Education doesn't cure cancer, let's be clear about that. A university degree won't shrink your tumor. But here's what the research shows. People with higher education have significantly better cancer survival rates. We're talking about 28% reduction in mortality compared to those with a lower education level. And here's where it gets complicated. It's not the education itself that's protective. It's everything that comes with that education. Education is a marker, a sign of health literacy, access to information, the ability to navigate complex systems, and a confidence to advocate for yourself when you're terrified or sick, or one of your family members is terrified and sick. But here's what happens to a lot of us men in midlife. We're busy. There's work pressure, family responsibilities, and if your body's sending you signals that you're ignoring them, you just push through. It's what guys often do. That persistent cough you've had for months, smoker's cough. That mole has probably changed shape, it's probably nothing. Or blood in your stool, hemorrhoids. Men with higher education, however, are more likely to get screened, recognize warning signs early, and actually go to their doctor before it becomes stage 4 and dangerous. They're also more likely to understand treatment options or ask the right questions or complete the full course of therapy. It's not because they're smarter. It's because the system rewards people who know how to work in the system. Now here's the thing. In countries such as Australia, Canada, England, where we've got universal healthcare, where theoretically everyone has equal access, education still matters. Because healthcare is not just about the access you have, it's about health literacy. Can you understand what the oncologist is telling you? Do you know what questions to ask? Can you advocate for yourself when something just doesn't feel right or the treatment is not what you want? This week's episode of Don't Let the Old Man In features Dr. Andy Tay, a renowned cancer researcher who's at the cutting edge of the latest treatments. It's a fascinating conversation I had with him in Singapore, and he breaks down the different types of cancers and the new ways of treating them, including how AI can help. I'm Pod O'Sullivan, I'm the host of Don't Let the Old Man In, and I'm radically changing my habits to live a fulfilling and healthy second half of my life. I'm also researching a doctorate in Oxford about how we men can navigate midlife better, because education is one of the biggest predictors of a healthy and fulfilling life. You may want to think about this as your midlife learning podcast.
Let's start here. The history of cancer is interesting. Crab-shaped tumors, chemical warfare, radiation, etc. And everyone, I think, knows somebody who's had cancer, but I'm not sure everyone knows what cancer is. So for the very start question, Andy, is what is cancer?
I think this is a good question. For some of the scientists, I think they might be asking you the same question, what is cancer? I think the definition of cancer has moved a lot with time, and I think technology plays a very important role. So when we first realized what was cancer, it was actually found in a biopsy of a dead person in a breast tissue. They found some clumps of tissue inside them, and they thought that that was not normal. So I think that was our first documentation of cancer. The next form of cancer was found in our blood, and people even thought that, cancer could be infectious because they are found in our blood. And right now we know that we can classify cancer into two different, there's liquid and solid. But basically, in my opinion, cancer is really a body of cells, and they have actually mutated. They were healthy cells to begin with, but they have accumulated so much mutation now, they have actually changed a lot of their function. So some of the functions they gain now is they grow very fast, in an uncontrolled manner. They may express proteins which are very different from our healthy cells. Why do I say that it is still very difficult to define is because for some solid tumors like breast, we have actually defined it quite well. There are different categories of breast cancer. But for many like pancreatic, colon, I think we are just at the tip of the iceberg. We need more research to better understand how many different types there are so that we can better define them.
You said cells mutate. That sounds like an X-Men movie in terms of the mutants. How do cells turn rogue? Like, what causes that?
Let's imagine today you have been punished by the teacher, and because you wrote something wrong in an essay, for example, and then the teacher asks you to write down this whole page of document for 1,000 times. So if you imagine if you write it 1,000 times, there will be moments where you are bound to make mistakes in the writing. So if you look at a cell, when a cell has a foundational DNA, and DNA is really what defines a cell and us. But as a cell divide, it needs to divide and create copies of the DNA, right? So as a cell multiply many times, the DNA code has been rewritten many, many times. And errors can happen because now you are writing such a massive documentation of the DNA code. So just like us, if you need to force to write something, we make errors. So likewise, as a cell divide, mutation can occur or error can occur in our DNA. And as they accumulate, they eventually become serious enough that convert a healthy cell into a cancer cell.
You mentioned we know some things about, say, solid tumors like
Yes.
breast cancer. You mentioned poisonous blood. Can you give us a sense of the history of how cancer were detected and the treatments over time?
So in the detection of cancer, actually, what happened then was actually very visual and manual. Typically, there will be an outgrowth of mass of cells that people could visibly see, or they can actually touch some of our body and they can find lumps of tissue that's harder. You can think of that as maybe melanoma, where the patches of dark patches will appear, or breast cancer. But there are many other types of cancer that you cannot really see from the naked eye. And so what happened then was that people realized that cancer cells grow very quickly. So if they grow very quickly, they will require this nutrient called glucose. So glucose allows the cancer cells to grow fast. So if I have glucose, and if I take something that can light up, and if I get it into the body, most of this glucose will go to the solid tumor because the cancer cells consume it so fast. With the fluorescent or the luminescent tag, we will know that there will be an unusual metabolism going there, and it could most likely be cancer. So that is our detection. For treatment, I think it's evolved quite a bit as well. I think you started talking about this chemotherapy. So it actually developed because of in one of the world wars where like the soldiers applied mustard gas, and they found that it killed many people, but it also preferentially killed organs which are growing very quickly. So they thought that, okay, probably there could be some molecules in mustard gas that are causing fast-growing cells to die, and fast-growing cells are cancer. So after many years of research, they realized that that is true, and then we developed chemotherapy.
From mustard gas.
Yeah,
Wow, it's extraordinary.
yeah.
So you went from surgery to gas-type treatments or chemotherapy-type treatments?
Yes.
And what's after that?
Then after that, we have radiotherapy. So basically, that is subjecting the tumor to a very strong dose of radiation to kill it. The good thing about it is more targeted in terms of the location. So let's say if somebody has a breast cancer, if you give a chemo, the chemo goes all around the body. which means that other non-cancerous cells like the brain, the liver also get damaged, right? Especially the liver that accumulates a lot of this like chemo medicine. But with radiation, it's a lot more targeted.
More precise.
Yes, more precise. However, the limitations, of course, if this is a blood cancer, then radiation would not be effective because they're everywhere. Or if the cancer has already metastasized to all parts of the body, then a radiation would not be that.
So radiation is used if cancer is detected early enough and hasn't spread.
Localized, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. And I've read in your notes that you say 1 in every 3 or 4 people will develop cancer in their lifetime, and that number is increasing. Is that right?
That number will worsen over time, but I think it will take maybe many decades for them to go to 1 in 2, 1 in 3. Yeah.
But the morbidity rates are not increasing.
Yes,
So
yes.
there seems to be a paradox
Yes.
there. Like we're living longer, which might be
Yeah.
one of the reasons why we get this
Yes.
higher rates, but we're not necessarily dying from cancer.
Yes.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think people are living longer. And going back to the question, right, if you need to rewrite your DNA so many times as a cells divide, the fact that we are living longer just gives us a longer time window for mutation to accumulate. And that is why people are getting more chronic diseases, including cancer. But what is also good is that, through this podcast and all that, what we really hope is that people realize the importance of research, right? With research, actually, many cancers are now very manageable. And that is why, the death rate has not really been increasing. In fact, it has dropped for many cancer types.
So does that go down to earlier detection?
Early detection, better treatments as well. I would say treatments actually play a very important role. Because even for detection, I think one of the hurdle is that many people, firstly, they may not be willing to go for diagnosis or detection because they could be in a denial mode. Or secondly, most people really go for that when they realize something is wrong with their body, but that is often a little bit too late. So I would say that treatment has actually improved the survival rate dramatically for cancer patients.
I live in Australia, as you know, and one of the things that hit me when I turned 50, out of the blue, I got a letter from the Australian government to do a sample for bowel screening.
Okay.
And that now happens either every year or every second year. And the first time you receive the letter and the sample in the post, you realize, oh, I'm getting old. The second and third time you realize, oh, I'm still healthy because I get it every single year. The results come back going, there's no problem. So that screening part must be helping a lot.
Yes, screening is really important. Unfortunately, I would say that for many of the more advanced detection or screening platforms that we have developed, they have not really, getting into the mainstream or being used in a clinic. One of the reasons is also because there is no treatment for them. So because there is no treatment, then even if you diagnose, there's nothing you can do. So I feel that detection and treatment needs to go hand in hand. Or else, it will be going back to like a chicken and egg problem. What should be available first, right? But, without being able to detect, you cannot treat it. But like with no treatment, the public, the healthcare policymakers, they may not be that willing to fund the diagnosis because there's no better outcome.
Yeah, you got the information, what
Yes.
you're going to do.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I was really keen to talk to you was your notion on immunotherapy being our best hope. For those of us who don't know what that means, explain to us what immunotherapy is and how does our immune system potentially help us?
I think a lot of the audience will know that during COVID, this word like immunity, immune system come out a lot. So you can think of the immune system as like soldiers in our body. There are many types of soldiers and they patrol our body all the time. They look for various things. They can look for viruses, bacteria, but also mutated cancer cells. And once immune cells see a mutated cancer cells, they have the ability to destroy them and eventually to prevent cancer from accumulating. What makes immune cells so powerful is that they are everywhere in our body. They are the only cells in our body that are mobile. If you think of like eye, liver, you will not expect to see a liver cell in our eye, right? And you will not expect to see a skin cell in our brain, but immune cells are everywhere. So they carry information throughout the whole body. So what means is that, for example, if you get a bacterial infection in your toe, and if the same bacteria infect you in your eye, potentially the immune cells can actually go up, or they can train other immune cells to detect it in the eye.
So the immune cells that are in your toe can then travel up
Yes.
to your eye and
Yes.
go, I know how to help this.
Yes, and because they are moving everywhere, right? So that is also the power, right? Now, if cancer appears in different parts of the body, they can detect it. And if the same cancer appears somewhere else, they have the memory and ability to recognize it again. I think that what's immune system so powerful. And so because of that, people are trying to tap on, okay, what can we help? How can we help the immune cells, or how can we educate the immune cells to treat cancer? So there are many different ways. For example, if you think of them as a soldier, you can give the immune cells certain weapons to kill cancer cells. For example, cancer cells often would build a barrier around them. You can think of them as a shield, but you can give something called antibody to the immune cells, and this allows immune cell to pierce through the shield that a cancer cell has, for example. Or you can even engineer the immune cells so that they can produce the spear themselves.
So let me get this right. Okay, so immune cells are effectively an army of soldiers
Yes.
that are mobile, can spread information
Yes.
and learning. You said they remember cancer, so they can remember, say, a past warfare and therefore how to
Yes.
treat that. Okay, that's quite extraordinary. And then the notion of antibodies is you can break through the protection that cancer cells have. And this is all happening in our body naturally.
It actually happens in our body naturally, and that is why we don't typically get cancer until very old. What happens is that with age, our immune cells function decline over time. Whereas, with accumulation of mutation, cancers actually become more powerful. They accumulate more mutation, so much that our immune cells are no longer able to recognize or to eliminate them. And when that balance is tweaked, and that is where tumors start to form, and certain tumor would become what we call immunosuppressive, meaning that they have developed strategies to mute the function of the immune system.
Okay. What is the connection between gut and brain and immune health?
So the idea of gut and brain is that information can travel between our gut. So that refers to like the colon, the intestine, information to the brain. People has found a lot in terms of, in our gut there's a lot of bacteria. So we collectively call them the microbiome. These microbiome are very important because they help to break down food. They also help to actually kill other infected bacteria, for example. So whatever they break down, there's a path that can travel to our brain to influence some of the brain function as well. One of the interesting things people have found quite many years ago is that for some brain diseases like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, they realized that the microbiome in these people are very different. And they also produce a very different set of nutrients profile. And the hypothesis right now is that that nutritional profile may affect the brain function and may then affect how some people develop Parkinson's or Alzheimer's much earlier in their life. So now the goal is they're trying to do two things. Can we change something about our microbiome so that we can, sort of delay the onset of these brain diseases? Or can we do something to the microbiome so that they can release something therapeutic and then it travels up to the brain for more targeted drug delivery?
Just a quick break. I'm really enjoying this conversation. I hope you are too. What I've been doing with these episodes is a couple of days after I record the conversation, I sit down, grab my ideas, and I put together my reflections on the conversation and what I've learned from them and what kind of sense am I making from them. That's called my reflections episode. I also try an experiment to actually apply what I've got from the conversation. You can listen to that in an episode. You can also download a simple handout.
So do you believe in the notion of taking particular products to activate your microbiology in your gut? And if so, what do you believe in that?
So as a consumer, I have been influenced by advertisements. I would say I actually bought some probiotics to eat, but I would say that for the science-wise, I think we are still trying to search for a definite answer. One of the big thing is firstly, if you were to consume these probiotics, there is still no definite answer how many of them are going to survive and colonize, and how long do you need to take them before you can really change your microbiome to something that's beneficial? And secondly, because each of us are quite different, so would the microbiome I take be equally helpful for you? So that is actually quite different. And that is why I think it will take a while before, probiotics or microbiome prescription will become a norm in the clinic.
You said something really interesting. You said, as a consumer,
Yeah.
I've taken probiotics,
Yeah.
and as a researcher, I'm not sure whether that's. So explain to us the paradox there.
If that product I know will not be causing me harm, I actually don't mind taking it to try. And I feel that I actually go for it with a sort of an open mind, because I know for sure that people has found that microbiome probiotics is good for the body, but I'm just not very sure whether I need something that's very personalized or specific to me. Okay. But I'm willing to try that and see what happens. If there's improvement, sure, I will continue taking that product. But as a science, I think as researchers, when we develop products, we actually hope that the products will benefit the larger population or the majority. So we want something that is very consistent across.
Yeah. So when you are taking, or when anyone takes probiotics, is there a way of assessing to what degree they're working or to what degree they're effective?
I think it can depend for the specific reason one is taking. So the probiotics I take was actually mostly to sort of maybe reduce my, for example, frequency of diarrhea when I eat certain food. Yeah. So I haven't really seen like significant improvement. So I actually stopped taking after a while. But it could be that I'm quite impatient, So it goes back to the same question again. How long do I need to take it before, something I will actually get some benefits? Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to the research that tells us that answer. Let's move on to something else. Again, as part of my research coming to chat to you today, I came across a story about Emily Whitehead, and she was the first CAR-T patient, which then starts with, what are T cells? Why are they important? And then why was her whole episode so important for medicine?
Right. So we call them CAR T cells. The CAR stands for chimeric antigen receptor, but for the audience, I think CAR is good enough. So CAR T cells is basically what we call super soldier. So I mentioned earlier that immune cells are soldiers that patrols in our body, right? So CAR is a protein that we introduce into the immune cells, and these CARs, you can think of them as weapons that actually makes the immune cell a lot more powerful. You can think of them as binoculars to allow them to detect the cancer cells. You can think of them as like a sphere that allow them to kill the cancer cells more effectively. And I think what Emily Whitehead case taught us was that immune memory is really powerful. So what happened was with Emily Whitehead, they actually tried many different types of treatment, like chemotherapy, but they have all failed.
What was her original treatment, or her original cancer?
So it was a type of leukemia, so it's a blood
cancer.
So therefore, things like radiation would not have been, surgery would not have been useful. So chemotherapy, after many different regime, and it did not really work. So they thought to try immune cell therapy. So basically, they introduced a DNA into the immune cells. The immune cells started producing this CAR protein. So after infusion, of course, there's also some risk involved. For example, like high fever, and there's a lot of like this molecule called cytokine being produced. So the body goes into this kind of like intense fighting mode that can be quite dangerous. But that was well managed. And so what they realized was that the CAR T cells were able to eliminate a lot of the leukemia cell. But what was most amazing was that memory was formed. The CAR T cells was found in her body, and they stayed and persisted in the body. So right now, if the leukemia comes back again, the body would have CAR T cells that could be reactivated to kill them.
And therefore, they will know how to attack that
Yes,
cell.
because they have the memory of what to do.
Yeah. So you mentioned that protein was added to the T cell to make it a super soldier. Is that the actual treatment? The protein, like, is it an injection type treatment? And is that the therapy? The injection?
Right. What really happened is we actually make the immune cells or CAR T cells outside of the body. So the process starts with I have a patient. I would take the immune cells from their blood, and then I introduce a DNA into the immune cells. What the DNA would do is that it will start to produce a protein called CAR. So once we found that, okay, the immune cells can produce the CAR protein, we will grow them into large numbers. So now we have a large number of CAR T super soldier, and then we reinfuse into the patient's body.
Do we know how long the memory lasts?
I can say that it may last a lifetime, but she's one of the earliest patients, and it has been like 13 years, I think, since she has been like cancer-free. So Yeah, I think easily we can go more than 10 years. And if that is the case, right, you can imagine for many of the elderly cancer patients, that would really great, because now you're giving a long window for people to say goodbye, to do things that they want. And I think it's actually a very impactful invention.
So this goes back to the early comment that we are living longer, and because of that, the rates of cancer are rising, but our treatments are getting so much better, the morbidity rates are lowering. This data being an example of that.
Yeah, this is exactly what it is. And as a scientist, I can see that there are so many great innovations coming out, not just from the labs, but also from the startups. Unfortunately, I think it is still very expensive to have CAR T. A single treatment will cost in the range of about $500,000 US. So there are not many people who can afford it. But we can see is that many countries are trying to do different things like automation to reduce the cost. They are trying to streamline some of the supply chain so that the cost can be brought down. And the hope is that, in the next like 5 to 10 years, the cost will be brought down significantly enough so that a greater number of people can benefit.
Let's just pause for a second. If you've made it this far, it must mean you're enjoying the show. We want to keep bringing you awesome conversations, but algorithms are like needy toddlers. They demand constant validation. So if you're liking this, please hit the like button, the follow button, the subscribe button, whatever button. It helps us land more great guests to keep entertaining you. And if you're listening to this on an audio podcast app, come over and watch us on YouTube. I promise we're reasonably photogenic. Back to the show.
I want to jump to the cost and the acceleration of technology and AI medicine in a few minutes. So before I move off the point, vaccinations and the notion of vaccinations and the notion of a cancer vaccination, is that possible?
Yes, actually cancer vaccination has started. There were a few companies that actually was quite successful, but what happened was not many of them actually persisted actually. Some of them went bankrupt. So perhaps one of the most common one you may know is for ovarian cancer or cervical cancer, where it could be caused by a certain virus. So you can actually do a cancer vaccine against that virus associated cancer. That is the typical one. We call them more of like the preventive cancer vaccine. So meaning you give something and prevents cancer, but we also have something called a therapeutic cancer vaccine. It's a little bit different, but let me try to explain. So therapeutic cancer vaccine is something like this. Is that, for example, a person has already gotten cancer. And so what you can do is you want to maybe train the body to know how to eliminate the cancer if you see it. So vaccine in this form is sort of like educating our immune cell. So what people can do is that they've already found out that, okay, if I have a cancer, these are the most common targets that the cancer cells would have. And my immune cells need to recognize this target to know that they are cancer. So what I can do is that I can have all these targets. I would train my immune cells to recognize them. Yeah, and then once the immune cells can recognize them, if they see the cancer cells with this tags in the future, they will know to kill the cancer cell. This is still a little bit challenging because each of our solid tumor are quite different. For example, let's say, both people may have the same, let's say, a liver tumor, but if I want to focus on 10 different cancer proteins, they may only share 1 or 2 in common. So how do you make something that is so personalized, commercially viable? It's not that easy.
Which is a lovely segue to the whole question of AI and the role of AI in medicine. And I know this is a question everyone's talking about, is what's the role of AI in put in whatever. But is there hope that AI can accelerate drug development or individual drug cancer detection to the point that treatment can be personalized?
Yes. So there are 3 things I can think of right now immediately. The first is finding the target. So each of us is so personalized. So, but at the same time, we have already done sequencing of so many cancer, and we know how different people may have different types of cancer. With AI, is it possible that we find certain patterns or we can start to stratify people. So it doesn't need to be personalized, but rather, based on certain expression of this cancer protein, we can put people into different groups, and then for different group, we have a sort of like stratified treatment. So that is one, cancer targeting. The second thing I can think of AI is in terms of finding the right people for clinical trials. When people go for clinical trials, these are often very sick people with no other options. But of course, these people also have many different things which are different. Even the age, the gender, underlying disease condition. So can AI be used to optimize the selection of people so that we can know for each group of people what is the best treatment? So again, stratification. And the last thing I think is quite relevant to me as a biomedical engineer is how can AI help in biomanufacturing, right? So labor cost is expensive. How can AI be used to optimize certain processing workflow so that when we make immune cells, it's much more efficient, less prone to failure, and more effective?
Am I right in understanding that some of the large AI companies, NVIDIA being an obvious one, healthcare and the notion of deploying AI into healthcare is one of the core strategies?
Yes. For example, something that's very computationally intensive is trying to understand how protein and RNA fold. Because by understanding how this molecule folds, you can better understand what to develop to target them. For example, earlier on we mentioned about the CAR protein, right? We introduce this CAR protein in the immune cells, and so this CAR protein can recognize another protein on the cancer cell. But this binding needs to be very strong for the immune cells to kill the cancer cell. You can think of an enhanced version of weapons, right? With things like NVIDIA's technology, you can make much more effective a CAR protein that binds a lot more tightly and effectively to the cancer cell protein. And that actually allows the immune cell to function more effectively.
Is there any risks for us as humans in terms of letting the cancer detection become more and more into the hands of AI as opposed to scientists?
I think what people often say about AI is like rubbish in, rubbish out. So I think there has need to be a very high quality, curated quality of input data before you can really trust the output data. But I would say that eventually what is going to happen in the world is that the AI can help in large library screening to find out, what are the few of these proteins targets that are very good. But eventually we need to test them experimentally. And so you don't need to worry that, if the computer finds something, we'll immediately dose it in a human. I don't think it will happen. It will be experimentally validated, with human cells, with preclinical models before we will move to clinical trials.
Let's move on to something completely different. I was in a conversation recently with someone who has cancer, and they were blaming personal stress in their life. This stress caused my cancer. Is that possible?
Yes. So about 10 to about 15 years ago, there was a lot of interest amongst funding governments or agencies around the world to start thinking and understanding the brain. They feel that the brain is our, the next frontier to crack. So one of the initiatives was to map out where are our nerves going to, because as you can probably know, right? We can feel something at the tip of our, our toes, our fingernails. So there are a lot of like nerves going into these places. So one very interesting studies they found was that in a skin cancer, they realized that the nervous system, which means our neurons, are communicating a lot with our skin cells, including cancer cells in our skin. And what was even more interesting was if they stress the animals start to produce a lot of what we call neurotransmitters. So you can think of them as like, there could be some molecules, and these neurotransmitters actually allow the cancer cells to grow even better. But all these are still being shown in animals. We have not shown that in humans yet. But I'm pretty sure there is a correlation. I mean, stress level are increasing and certain cancer incidents are rising, but correlation is of course not the same as causation. And as scientists, I think our role is to find out whether there is really a causative relationship, and with that, what can we do? For example, can we design certain strategy to block that communication between the nervous system and the cancer cells.
So correlation means, let me just check with you that I'm correct in this. A correlation means the more something happens, the more likely it is to
Yes.
cause something else.
Yes.
So it doesn't mean it is causing,
Yes,
it's just
yes.
likely.
Yes.
The higher rate of something is more likely to cause a higher rate of something else.
There may not be a relationship between them. I think one of the most famous example that people would use is, for example, if there are, for example, like more ice cream sales right now period, but it could be, for example, linked to there are more babies being born. But
It's not relationship.
It's correlative. Yeah.
Can I go from stress to prevention?
Yes.
Because it strikes me we're doing extraordinary work, and you're doing extraordinary work in researching the potential treatment of and cure of. But I would imagine the step before that is how do we prevent rates of cancer? And I read a statistic from Professor John Wong from National University of Singapore, where he said in 2019, an economic study showed that the contribution of people aged 60 and above to society, so through work, through volunteering, grandparenting, etc., was 7.3% of GDP in most Western countries, which is quite extraordinary. But he then went on to say that one extra year of life expectancy, as in we get older, as long as we stay healthy, and that's the important part, adds 3 to 4% extra to GDP, as in the cumulative impact is phenomenal. What suggests to me then is how do we prevent rates of cancer or rates of disease is really important for that reason alone.
I think there has been a lot of studies, and typically people agree on this number of about that the risk of cancer, 20 to 30% is sort of determined by genes. So that is how we are born with. There's very little we can do, but 70% could be lifestyle associated. So for example, for longest time, we know that tobacco consumption can lead to lung cancer. Colon cancer can be caused by a lot of carcinogenic reagents in our preserved food. So you see that now that for certain cancer, we know that these are the things that's having a causative relationship. Then as consumers, we have the responsibility to either avoid them or to advocate for certain changes in terms of what is being sold, for example. Actually, one of the big things that people are even talking about is microplastics, right? There's a big thing now, and people have found that we have microplastic throughout our entire body. And some studies, very small number, has linked that to things like chronic inflammation and also cancer. I think the jury is still out whether it is really having a direct relationship. But I think what we can know is that for things which are already proven scientifically to have a causative relationship, we should try to avoid them. Eventually, I think my motto in life is this word balance. A lot of people would actually question, like, what is it to live healthily, to live productively? I feel that as humans, we've already cracked the code. So we want to have a balanced diet, we want to have a balanced sleep, we want to have a balanced physical activity. But I think the challenge is how do you motivate people to do this?
Taking the pill is faster and
it's much
easier
faster.
if I need to do that.
Yeah.
So if we as humans are knowing that our scientists and our researchers and the whole medical community is getting better and better at treating cancers, is that less and less of a motivation to do something to prevent it then?
Actually, I do not think so, because even though in science we can develop better treatments or better prevention strategy, the fact is that I think you want to be in charge of your health. You do not want your health to be left in the hands of some doctors or researchers or even funding agencies, right? What if one day the science agencies say that they decided to stop funding research in certain type of cancer? I feel that we should be responsible for our health to the greatest extent as we can, and I think that personal responsibility is quite important.
What's your view of society in this? Like Singapore, where we are today recording this interview, Singapore has recently been it's a blue zone area, which is very interesting in terms of where Singapore is evolving to. There's a lot of research happening in Singapore around communities and communities getting involved in their own health, health monitoring and disease prevention. So given what you just said about we should all take care of our own health, what's your view about society's role or society's contribution in helping everybody else?
One thing I can think about is that many people may feel a lot of resistance for them to actually start taking care of their own health. But when they see that somebody close to them is doing that, they actually become more easily motivated. They'll be curious to know, how have you benefited? And I think that kind of like personal to personal recommendation is always the best. For example, let's say if I see a friend now and a friend look much healthier than before, I'll be very curious to know, hey, what have you done to your lifestyle that makes you look much better, feel much better? And I think that kind of like personal recommendation can really motivate people. And I think eventually we want to have this kind of like, health ambassador or some sort of thing going on so that generally people in society feels that there's a actually visible benefit for me being healthy, being productive. Yeah.
It's an interesting comment on societies that are more individualistic versus more community oriented in terms of how that's going to play out. Yeah. Getting very personal now then, given you've opened that door, what are you doing to stay healthy and to stay young?
I actually practice like the 3 things that I mentioned earlier. So I try to get at least 8 hours of sleep every day. I exercise about 3 to 4 times a week, trying to balance out different things. And then the last thing I do is really in terms of diet as well. For example, my sister has recently started this like 16-8 kind of fasting. Yeah. So you have an 8-hour window to eat, and then she doesn't eat for 16 hours. For me, actually, I realized I've been practicing it for the longest time in my life because my mom doesn't used to make breakfast. And I only have my first meal at lunch. So I've been actually doing it for quite some time, so it's quite easy for me. But I think for people who are interested to try, they can always start smaller. It doesn't need to be 16 hours, it can be 10, and then progressively you increase.
So you're raising intermittent fasting. It's something I've been playing with myself for the last maybe 6 weeks, and skipping breakfast as per your sister and just starting lunch at around 11:30, 12. It's actually quite easy.
Yeah, it's not that difficult actually. Yeah.
I've noticed a big change just by doing that. Quite interesting. What's important to you now in terms of relative to when you were in your 20s, your 30s? Like as you're getting older, what are you noticing is becoming more important for you?
There's always this funny video online when they show that when a group of 20, when they gather together, they will talk about, what is the pop music, what is the fashion. In people in their 30s to 40s, they will be talking about what are the discounts for health supplements. It's actually quite funny, but it actually resonates quite well with me. I would actually take a look about, what are the latest like sort of health thing people are talking about, and to try to understand them, because 30 to 40 is such a good time of the life, and you want to make sure that you are able to enjoy the fruits of a labor. And so it got me very interested to understand about what can I do to improve my health. Yeah, now and also like prepare for the future. Yeah.
So help train now for your last decade.
Yeah.
Before we finish up, can I congratulate you on receiving the President's Science and Technology Award from Singapore National Academy of Science and the National Research Foundation in Singapore recently. That's quite an award.
Thank you.
I noticed a post that you had I think it might have been LinkedIn a while after you got the award, and what struck me is a lot of us as human beings put our posts straight up in terms of I've just finished this course, I've just been this, and it's usually followed by the word humbled. I'm humbled to say I've just done this and I've just done this. You didn't do that. You actually waited for a while so you could reach out and thank everybody else who helped you, which I thought was quite fascinating that you did that.
Yeah, I decided to do this because I feel that there was so much of this like excitement around this, and I felt that I needed a time to think about what this award means to me, and who are the people who have supported me along the way. I think it's definitely not a one man's effort. I think my students have contributed a lot, and a lot of my colleagues have helped me, many senior colleagues. So I wanted to thank them like one by one personally. So what I did was based on the projects I have and how I met these people. So I crafted a message very tailored to them. And I also wrote, for example, for this person who gave me guidance on this, gave me resources on this. Once I got people acknowledging this, then I decided to post something on LinkedIn, because I feel that I want them to know it first. But there's a lot of information out there. I was just not allowed to share it before the actual news came out.
In positive psychology area, there's a lot of talk about the notion of gratitude
Yes.
being a really important positive serotonin enhancer, etc. Given you reached out and you expressed gratitude to all these people, what was the benefit you got from that?
I think the benefit I got was that I think people know how much of a difference they have made to my career and my life. And I think that is actually, to me, something very precious. You want to let people know how much they mean to you. And what they have done is actually meaningful. Yeah.
Well, you've added a lot of value to our conversation today, Andy. I thank you for that. My last question for you is, for people listening, what are your final words of wisdom for the audience?
Yeah, I don't know whether I can offer words of wisdom, but I think we sort of exist in a time where it is there are so many options out there, tips to stay healthy, etc. And there are also many temptations not to do the right thing, right? Just lying on the sofa, watching Netflix all day long and stuff. So I feel that we want to think about what are some of the things that how our actions can also play a role in our future self, and how can we actually slowly start to make a positive move towards more productive later life, for example. And what I mentioned earlier on about having this word balance is something important, and I hope that for people watching this, they can think about how they can introduce balance into their life.
Well, on that note, I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you.
Thanks for listening or watching, depending which platform you're accessing this podcast on. I hope you enjoyed it. I really got a lot from that conversation. And I will record a short episode next on what I've learned, my thoughts on the conversation, some reflections. And I'm going to do an experiment based upon what I've learned today. So you'll hear about that in the next episode. If you want a permanent reminder of what we chatted about or some of the key summary points, go to don'tlettheoldmanin.com/reflections and download that. In the meantime, don't let the old man in. We'll see you next time.